Have you ever had one of those moments where you stop and realize your life feels full? Not necessarily full in a good way, just full. Too many responsibilities, too many thoughts running through your head, too many small things competing for your attention. And the strange part is that nothing looks obviously wrong from the outside. You're functioning, you're handling things, you're even showing up, but internally something feels scattered. And when that feeling shows up, most of us respond the same way. We try to push harder, we try to organize more, plan better, work longer, but here's the quiet truth most people eventually discover: pushing harder rarely creates clarity. Most of the time, it just adds more pressure to an already full life. I remember a time not that long ago when I sat down at my desk one evening with my planner open in front of me. I had the best intentions. I thought if I could just organize things well enough, I would finally feel caught up. So I started writing tasks for tomorrow, things I needed to remember, ideas I didn't want to forget. And before long, the page was completely full. And I remember sitting there, staring at it, thinking, this isn't helping me. If anything, it made me feel even heavier because the list wasn't actually giving me clarity. It was just showing me how many things were competing for my attention. And that moment led me to something that changed how I approach overwhelm. Instead of asking, what do I need to do next? I started asking a different question. What actually matters right now? That question became the beginning of something I now call the clarity reset system. Here's something many women experience during midlife. Life gets more complex. There are years of responsibilities layered on top of each other: family, work, home, relationships, health, future plans, and often we're still carrying expectations we created decades ago. Expectations about where we thought we would be by now, expectations about what success should look like, expectations about how much we should be able to handle. Over time, though, those expectations create pressure, and pressure creates noise. The more noise there is in your life, the harder it becomes to hear your own clarity. That's why many people try to solve overwhelm by becoming more productive. But productivity isn't the solution when the real problem is too much internal pressure. The clarity reset system begins with something very simple. You stop trying to push forward and instead you step back. Not forever, though, just long enough to see clearly again. The system works through three quiet steps: pause, sort, realign. The first step is often the hardest: pause. When life feels overwhelming, the instinct is to keep moving. But clarity almost always appears in moments of stillness. Sometimes that pause looks like sitting with a notebook. Sometimes it's a quiet walk. Sometimes it's even simply giving yourself permission to stop trying to solve everything for a few minutes. Because when you pause, something interesting happens. Your nervous system begins to settle. And once that happens, your thinking changes. You start seeing things more clearly. Many people believe clarity comes from thinking harder, but clarity usually comes from creating space. When your mind is constantly reacting to responsibilities and expectations, everything feels urgent. But when you step back, even briefly, something shifts. You begin noticing which things actually matter and which things were simply making noise. Once you pause, the next step is to sort. Not everything in your life deserves the same level of attention, but when everything lives inside your head, it can all feel equally important. So, the Clarity Reset system helps you separate things into three simple categories: what actually matters right now, what can wait, and what doesn't belong on your plate anymore. This step alone can feel surprisingly freeing because many of the pressures we carry aren't even necessary. They are expectations we've never stopped to question. One of the biggest realizations I had during this process was how many things I was doing simply because I had always done them, not because they mattered, not because they were aligned with where my life was heading, but because they had quietly become part of my routine. And when I began sorting through those things, something surprising happened. My life didn't fall apart when I removed them. In fact, things started feeling lighter. Sometimes the most powerful form of progress isn't adding something new, it's removing something that was quietly draining your energy. We often assume progress requires more effort, but many times progress begins with subtraction. The final step of the Clarity Reset system is realignment. Once you've paused and sorted through the noise, you begin choosing where your attention actually belongs. This isn't about creating a perfect plan. It's about reconnecting with what matters most in this season of your life. Because the truth is, midlife often brings change. Things that once felt important may no longer feel aligned. Goals evolve, priorities shift, and sometimes clarity appears when we allow ourselves to acknowledge that change. One of the quiet freedoms of midlife is realizing that you are allowed to redesign your life. You are allowed to update your priorities. You are allowed to question expectations that once felt permanent. Clarity grows when you give yourself permission to realign. The Clarity Reset system isn't really about productivity. It's about reducing unnecessary pressure. When pressure decreases, clarity naturally rises. And once clarity returns, progress becomes much easier because you are no longer trying to move everything forward at once. The Clarity Reset system isn't really about productivity. It's about reducing unnecessary pressure. When pressure decreases, clarity naturally rises. And once clarity returns, progress becomes much easier because you are no longer trying to move everything forward at once. You're simply moving the right things forward. If life has been feeling scattered lately, there may not be anything wrong with you. You may simply be carrying too much mental noise. Sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is step back, pause, sort through what truly matters, and realign our attention with the life we actually want to build. Because progress doesn't come from pushing harder, it comes from seeing clearly again. Remember, progress doesn't come from pressure, it comes from clarity.